Hello, I'm going to talk about intergenerational trauma and the need for healing that intergenerational trauma. A related topic is historical trauma. It is a subject often not discussed. It starts with systems of oppression and there's a cycle of disadvantage. There's unemployment, which could lead to mental health issues and drug use, then criminal behavior, then you end up in the prison industrial complex. You have interaction with the justice system. Due to that, which relationships can break down. A person could end up in divorce or lose their children. Um, there could be homelessness. And as a result of this cycle of disadvantages, a person can experience trauma and they are experiencing oppression. Poverty would be part of that. So why is there a need to heal trauma and intergenerational trauma? Is because unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. In other words, mental health issues which are not addressed will sooner or later surface in the form of physical problems, physical ailments, and so on. There is a concept called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So the more a person has, if a person has experienced one or more of these ACEs in childhood, they are likely to have various challenges in their life later on. The more ACEs they have, the more challenges they will have to face. So if a child growing up below the age of 18 in their household, if they experience only one parent or no parents, if they experience someone in their household uses alcohol or abuses alcohol or drugs, if a person in their household or family member was arrested or got deported, someone in their household is depressed or suicidal or emotionally disturbed. Also, some scholars believe that being Black is adverse childhood experience, or it's a trauma in America. Also, being an immigrant, or if you have experienced war, or if you are a refugee. So there's three kinds of ACEs, three categories. Under abuse is physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Under neglect, it's physical or emotional neglect. Under household dysfunction, there's mental illness, incarceration, or a person going to jail or getting deported, for example, due to being undocumented in America. Mother treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. What are the effects of ACEs? The effect on behavior is lack of physical activity, missed work, drug use, alcoholism. The effect on physical and mental health is that there are these risks like heart disease, severe obesity, diabetes, sexually transmitted diseases, suicide attempts, stroke, depression, COPD, cancer, and broken bones. So broken bones means can also mean that the person might be accident prone. In one study, the exposure to violence that students experience is very high. 10% have witnessed family violence. 25% have witnessed any form of violence. 46% experienced a direct assault, and 61% were exposed to violence. But in many urban areas, this figure approaches 100%. That 100% of the students or people in some communities could be exposed to violence. And some of that violence is in society, and there are systems of society that perpetuate that kind of violence or create. So there are communities and there is a creation of violent communities and societies and individuals. How that happens is living in a culturally unsafe environment, or being profoundly hurt as a child or as people, a group of people or a nation of people, being hurt, but being prevented from experiencing or expressing the pain of that hurt. You might be told that your experience or your pain is not real, or is irrelevant, or like Joy DeGruy would say later, that get over it, or is what people are told in a cruel manner. Having no one in whom we can confide our true feelings, and not being heard, acknowledged in our pain. Having a lack of education or knowledge, therefore being unable to intellectualize the abuse. Often we don't have words for our experience. Having no way we can transform our pain without repeating the cycle of abuse on ourselves and others. So we end up, as they say, hurt people. A person who is hurt will end up hurting others, but there's a way to stop that cycle. What is the impact of trauma on cognitive function? It has various effects, including sitting still, processing oral information. Your remembering or memory is affected. Talking when experiencing stress reaction is affected. So the stress reaction is fight, flight, or freeze, and the fourth is appease. But freeze could be that while talking, that you could experience that. Organizing, contextualizing, and setting goals, concentration and focus are also affected. This is a short clip on historical trauma.
Where people suffer from something. An elderly woman, a full-blood Dakota from where I'm from in Crow Creek. I was with her one time, and a lot of bad things were going on. A lot of bad things. And I had asked her, why does this always happen to us? Why do we do these things to each other? Why does it always happen? And she didn't say nothing. She's driving a car for a while. I looked over and she was crying. And she said in her language, Ioki Shicha, a deep embedded genetic depression. See, our people at one time, the Dakota people, or all Native Americans, had a very strong connection with the Creator, a very strong connection with Mother Earth, a very strong connection with nature, the forces of nature, all living things on this planet. And all this was taken from us, like that. And we lost this connection with everything that we had. That's where this depression comes from. A lot of our people are severely depressed. They don't even know it. This depression is just now clinically diagnosed as the same thing soldiers suffer from when they return from combat.
What he mentioned at the end is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which is also in Joy DeGruy's work. She also refers to it as another side of that is post-traumatic slave disorder. And at the end, there is a way out. There is a way out, which is to at the end, the way out is called PTG, from PTSD to PTG, post-traumatic growth. What is historical drama? What is historical trauma? What is the definition? Cumulative emotions and psychological wounding or injury over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma experiences, resulting from a cataclysmic history of genocide. Intergenerational trauma can be from Native American genocide, slavery, migration, divorce, substance abuse, colonization, etc. And this affects the biology and chemical changes to DNA. It gets passed to the child in the second generation, and then to the third generation. It is passed on in the form of behavior to which include risk of self-harm, addiction, attachment issues, suicide, heart and liver disease, cancer increases. And that's another way of passing down to the third generation through biology and through behavior. So the effects are unsettled trauma, depression, high mortality, recalling and re-experiencing trauma, increase of alcohol or substance abuse, child abuse, and violence, and other effects. What is generational trauma? We're going to look at a video by Professor Joy DeGruy, who is a PhD in social work.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome is an explanatory theory that really looks at multi-generational trauma. One of the things that's difficult for people is their first response is, oh my God, that happened so long ago. We're talking about people being captured, shipped, sold, beaten, raped, experimented on. And then you have to ask the question, did the trauma continue? Yes, so 300 years of trauma, no help, freed, no help, more trauma. If it's a sustained trauma, then the impact of that is also sustained. When we look at multi-generational trauma, we're looking at people who are maybe victims of natural disasters, and their families and their children, generations of folks who have experienced war. And we know that there are residual mental, emotional, traumatic impact. And what I did was I started to look at the African-American experience, starting with slavery as a real clear, long enduring trauma. So I started to see that there were clear connections between that survival behavior and contemporary living in African-American experience. I started to see common behaviors that I took for granted as well cultural. There's adaptive behaviors, survival behavior. Well, what are they? Let's just say 2019, you have a Black mother and a white mother. The sons go to school together. They find themselves at a meeting. The Black mother leans over to the white mother and says, I just wanted to mention to you that I noticed that your son is really doing quite well. And the white mother's response is, oh, thank you. She begins to go on and on about he won the science fair, his uncle's an astronaut. She's just oozing. She realizes the Black mother's son is actually excelling. And she says, well, wait a minute, your son's the one that's really coming along. And the Black mother responds, oh my God, he's a handful, but oh, he just works my nerves. Now, when I'm working with African-American people, it doesn't matter what the audience is. It doesn't matter what class. If I were to ask, is she very proud while she's saying those denigrating things? And everybody laughs and goes, of course, there's a secret. Because everybody Black knows that even though the Black mother is going, oh my God, she's really proud. So now let's roll that scene back 300 years. And let's say this Black mother is working in the fields and a white slave owner comes through and says, wow, that boy is really coming along. What is she gonna say? No, he's not. He's stupid. He's shiftless. He can't work because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate them to protect them. That is called appropriate adaptation when living in a hostile environment. The little white boy, say Timmy, he feels really comfortable and happy about what his mom just said about him. And Trey looks at his mom and wonders, why can't you be proud of me? Because he doesn't understand the secret yet. And by the time he learns the secret, he will have already been injured by it. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. PTSD is a disorder that occurs as a result of a single trauma. You don't even have to be there to actually get a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You could just hear about something horrific happening to someone you love. So you have people who have experienced it firsthand, people who have witnessed it in their environment, right? People who are continuing to be oppressed. That exacerbates any possibility of healing. So it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, because then it becomes part of what we call your socialization process. So you begin to normalize a way of living and being, everything from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend. All of these things are colored by history. And if you don't understand it, you're going to fold in things that you've just assumed are normal. But post-traumatic stress disorder, exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future. There was a point where there were African-American children in different urban settings that didn't expect to live to be adults because they saw so much death that they started planning their funerals like at 13, 12, as young as 10. When you start looking at the simple biology, you start looking at the impact of stress on health. And while we look at general stress, we know finances, you have illnesses, all these different things. How about being Black? How does factoring in being Black in America impact your stress level and therefore your body's ability to operate its own immune system? Because we know it compromises the immune system. Once you understand it, then you can deal with it. Because you see, it's habitual. You're socialized. It becomes part of your being. So one of the ways you begin to address that multi-generational trauma is to work with the people it directly impacts, to hear from them. And when you give the people the information, they can use it. I think the first order of business is beginning to have a conversation. And the other is to educate the larger society. You have to stop the assault. So this is not purely a clinical thing. This requires social justice and change. That's where part of the healing is. It's not in a clinical setting or in a pill. It's in fairness and justice and safety and equity. We got to work with some of those clinical things, some of those issues of panic and anxiety. And we also have to deal with the fact that you have a system that is set up to oppress you and to continue to injure you. Both those things have to be dealt with. And they cannot singularly by themselves affect a change. They have to be done collectively.
So that was Professor Joy DeGruy, who has written a book called Post-Traumatic Stress Syndrome. It's an excellent book, and she has many, many videos and lectures on YouTube. So just wanted to mention that all of these ideas, they also help us explain what happened to colonized people. We have a colonial mentality. Sometimes, we hear that we have a slave mentality. So people who are colonized like us from Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, South Asian region, colonized by the British for 200 years, we have to look at also how the intergenerational trauma has carried on to us. Because the British, like other colonizers, they had very specific policies that these were stated policies, including that it is the white man's burden to civilize the dirty natives and to Christianize them. They used a policy of divide and rule in which they made the local people fight with each other. So just like in imperialism these days, if you keep the local people busy fighting with each other, while the imperial powers, they steal all the resources and control what's really happening in the country, or and steal the future from the generations. The British and colonizers also had a policy to make sure that the local people hate themselves, hate their colors, hate their race, and so on, hate our history. So they made sure that the history is erased so that the people are sold a lie that your ancestors were poor or savages or backward, and we rescued them. While the truth is that they rob and they loot everything. And the British also had a very clear policy that they said that we will not only control their lands, but we will rule their hearts and souls for generations to come. So if that was their stated policy, growing up, even as a child, I heard that the British and the colonizers and the imperial powers, they have a 500-year plan. So if the British have this plan, that was their plan, to make sure that the trauma gets passed to future generations. So we have to look at what is the trauma that we're carrying from that colonization experience. Here is another short video.
We already know that this is a gene that contributes to risk for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. When we looked at their own children also had an epigenetic change in the same spot on a stress-related gene.
We're talking about multiple traumas. for hundreds of years. Not only are you traumatized directly, you're seeing your friends, your cousins, and everyone in your environment being beaten, sold away from family, raped, mutilated, all those things that were happening, and eventually, of course, lynched. But looking at those traumas, is it plausible that those people escaped stress-related illness? Not plausible.
So that was again Professor Dr. Joy DeGruy. Here is one other short video, 4 minutes. This is from Australia, but everything here applies to what happened in the US and in other places.
Story of our communities, people, and nation starts a long, long time ago. The story of our communities, people, and nation starts a long, long time ago. More than 60,000 years, in fact. This was when our culture and our law first started to thrive. We knew who we were. And where we belonged. We took care of each other, our land, and our waters. We ate food that made us healthy, lived on country, and abided by our laws and song lines. Our families, our children were happy, with strong minds and hearts, because they were where they belonged. But then, everything changed.
Colonization came, bringing wars, disease, famine, violence, and the destruction and violation of our cultural laws, sacred sites, families, and communities.
We were denied our knowledge, language, ceremonies, and identity. The very things that tell us who we are and where we belong. And our connections with each other and the land grew weak.
And then, our children were taken from us. They had their names changed and their identities stripped away. They were told that Aboriginal people were bad. Worse still, they were told that their parents and grandparents did not want them.
For years this happened, and those children became known as the stolen generations.
Our children were denied love and experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. This left very deep, very complex, and very real wounds, leaving scars that are still being felt personally, socially, spiritually, and collectively.
In the time when our story started, we were able to parent in the cultural way that has seen our families survive and thrive for generations. Our people were strong, and our culture flowed and healed us in times of hurt.
But since the trauma of colonization and the stolen generations, we have not been able to heal in the same way. And we have unknowingly passed this trauma on to our children through sharing our sad stories and having them witness and experience our pain. This is known as intergenerational trauma, And we see symptoms today in broken relationships, disconnected families, violence, suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse.
But this is not where our story ends. We still have strong minds and hearts, and we still know who we were and where we belong. By creating safe and strong communities together, supporting our families to be free from pain, returning to our culture and building a strength of identity, we can stop the cycle of trauma and bring about positive intergenerational change so that we can continue to thrive for the next 60,000 years. There are simple things that we can all do to help heal our trauma.
Visit healingfoundation.org.au to find out more.
This map shows some of the thousands of tribes and nations who were here just in the US. But if you look at all of North America, South America, it is said that the native people were here for at least 60,000 years. This next video is a clip from the author Resmaa Menakem, who is the author of My Grandmother's Hands.
I've been doing this work or some facet of this work my whole life. I think you can't be in a brown or black or any other type of body and not have been doing this work, either because you've decided you're not going to pay attention to it or you're going to pay attention to it. And so for me, I was doing this work before I came out of my mother's womb, because she had to do the work. so I had to do the work. And so what I've done, my piece, I believe, is to help people stop genuflecting to cognition as the only intelligence that we have, right? As the primary intelligence that we have, that the brain is the be all end all, and not even the physical brain, not even the embodied brain, but the kind of decontextualized brain is what we hold to be the arbiter of whether or not something is truth, factual, or grounded. And so my work has really been about, especially for brown and black people and indigenous people, for us to begin to reclaim those ties to creation, move from race to culture to back to creation. One of the things that I've been saying is that for the next 10 years, and it has always been, but for the next 10 years, I believe that this next 10 years is going to be the decade of the Black woman. The emergence of the Black woman. And one of the reasons why I say that is that everybody on this call, when creation decided it was going to create the first representation of humanness, it decided that that representation was going to be a Black woman. Now just think about that. Think about how upside down things are right now, to where the thing that I'm saying right now that is factual, that everybody knows it in their bones, that some people on this call are actually recoiling from that there is not one person on this call who does not have the mitochondrion of an African woman in their bodies, regardless of pigmentation. And what white body supremacy does is thwarts that emergence, thwarts that understanding, thwarts that capacity. And so my work is really about reclaiming those pieces that we know to be true with regard to intelligences. And so my primary my primary rubric that I start everything off of is that, you know, in this structure, in this 500-year experiment with white body supremacy, that the underlying rubric that organizes everything, and if you don't understand this, everything else will confuse you. The underlying rubric is that the white body is the supreme standard by which all bodies, humanity shall be measured structurally and philosophically. I'm not talking about intrinsic worth. I'm talking about structural worth. And that structural worth has been sewn into every institution across the world. If you have the white body prostrating itself as the example of humanness and as the measure of humanness, then everything else is a deviance from that standard. This isn't something that my ancestors created, right? This is something that white people and elite white people created, and poor white people gobbled it up because the brutality of elite whites on poor whites was perfected on them. And so by the time white body supremacy was offered to them, they gobbled it up. And so the idea of pigmentation being a stand-in, a fill-in, a shorthand for humanness is the underlying structural issue that, because white people have been standardized, they don't even see it as an issue. They don't even know it's a thing, right? Because they haven't had to practice or work with it. White people can go their whole lives and not have to work with race. Collectively, race is not a central component in how they move through the world. Black and brown and indigenous people can't afford that luxury. They are not advantaged by that. And I'm not talking about ethnicity. I'm not talking about identity. I'm not talking about national origin. I'm not talking none of that. I'm saying that at its base, there is a structure that has been set up that is about pigmentation being a shorthand for who is human and who is not, who is 3/5 of a human, who is not, who are considered savages and who is not. And that's based on pigmentation. And that's where I start. I don't start with identity, because a lot of people want to genuflect to identity as a way to dodge around that. And I'll always come back to that and how that shows up in the body. So that's what I do. That's what I try and help people with.
And now I'm going to move forward to another part of this talk. It's good to have a pen and paper ready. He's going to ask for that for a short exercise.
Talking with black and brown bodies, just to have them look behind them over their shoulder and giving them and saying, you give yourself black and brown people, a lot of times when I'm doing my work with them, I have to help them orient and do things and do what I call primal reps in order to begin to have some sense of discernment between the constriction and the protection and what's resourced and more open. At the beginning, it's hard to do that, right? So simple things like when I'm talking with black and brown bodies, just to have them look behind them over their shoulder and giving them and saying, you give yourself permission to look behind you. You ain't crazy. You feel like the next shoe is just gonna drop because it always has. It's not like we walking around here making up shit. It always has dropped. live in a country, most of us in America are all of us in America are living in a country right now where our feet are on stolen land. Now, you got to understand what I'm saying when I say that. I'm not saying, you know how people say, well, we need to do a land acknowledgement and stuff like that. Don't nobody give a shit. Most people who get up in front of people and say, we're going to do land acknowledgement don't give a shit about indigenous people. Think about the embodiment of what I'm saying. That the land that we are on, people were exterminated off of it. And other people claimed it as their own. And other people got it as their own for free. For free. For free. For free. And you wonder why Black and brown and indigenous people look at white people and their white friends when their white friends go, oh my God, I can't believe he put babies in cages. Oh, what? You can't believe this structure put babies in cages. I knew America had jumped the shark when 20 white babies in Sandy Hook had got murdered and nobody did nothing. These are white babies. Rape in this country was legal in order to create a product, which was me. Not illegal rape, legal, sanctioned rape for over 200 years. Legal, sanctioned rape of people that look like me, of indigenous people. Legal. Most of the rape started around 10 to 12 years old. Imagine being a mama, knowing that your baby is 9 years old and knowing what's getting ready to happen. And or a boy, because boys got raped, because remember, and men got raped because rape is about power. Imagine rape was used as a tool. Imagine what's the cortisol level on those plantations. Imagine what the cortisol level for ones that are in the north. Imagine. Now what gets passed down? So orienting for me is to have Black and brown bodies begin to say and acknowledge, yes, something has happened. I look around me and I also look for safety places. I look for windows. I look for doors. Why? Because I want to be able to remind my body that I can leave when my ancestors did not have access to do that. My ancestors, if they stayed, they got brutalized viciously. And if they left, they got brutalized viciously. The derooting, and this is after the derooting of taking us from Africa. There is a deroot. Anybody that's ever done a house plant, you take a house plant, you bring it home, you do everything that you're supposed to do, and you take it from one one planter to another planter and it still dies, you're dealing with what's called root shock. There's a shock from taking it from that thing that it has become accustomed to and putting it and transplanting it into something else, even if you've done everything right. Black people are just now starting to begin to deal with that. Indigenous people are just now starting to deal with that. And I'm talking about indigenous here, I'm talking about indigenousness in Australia, I'm talking about indigenousness in New Zealand, indigenousness in Mexico. A lot of people. So the five superpowers that created and set the seeds in the ground and the fertile ground for white body supremacy to reign supreme, there were 5 superpowers: England, France, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal. There's a reason why in Mexico people speak Spanish. The same thing that happened to the people of Mexico happened to the people of what we call America. Same thing happened to me. The reason why I'm speaking English is because those were the people of those 5 superpowers that did what they did. Self-interest, free land, free labor, feralness. So right now, everybody, I didn't hit you with a bunch of somatic elicitations. Truth and somatic elicitation. So now I want you to look straight at the camera. Just kind of notice what's happening. Notice what's the vibe that's showing up. What's the meaning making that's clashing in and crashing into other meanings. Notice the urgings. I want to get up. I want to sit down. I want to leave. I want to say something. I want to scream. I want to say yes, all at the same time. And then I want you just to look over either shoulder and look behind you and find the exits and find the windows. Look up, look down, look around, but especially look behind you. As you're doing that, I want you to soften your eyes. Just let them soften, let them drop. Open your mouth just a little bit. And let your tongue just flip around your mouth. And notice as you're doing that, as you keep looking around, look behind you, notice if there's any sway that comes in, any slight rocking or sway. If it does, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. And as you're doing that, you can actually add a little sound if you want to. It can be a moan, it can be a wail, it can be a whimper, it can be a growl, whatever the kind of primal body or primal energy that wants to show up, just let it show up. Sometimes people bare their teeth as a ward or warning. This may be energy that your ancestors could not display. It may be an urge to want to push. And I want you to stop and then take your pen and then just write, not narrative. Just write what's the vibe, what's the image, what's the meaning, what's the behavioral urges, what's the affect or feeling, and what is the sensate or sensation or temperature change or sweating or heaviness in the spittle, like what's coming up, not narrative. Is it all right if they take about 2 or 3 minutes to do that, sis?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll let you
Okay.
know when it's up.
All right.
Maybe another 30 seconds or so.
Yeah. You know, as you're writing, I want to say that the things in terms of orienting are not done. I don't talk to people and do work with people around orienting in order to stop the quaking or stop the stuff. We've created kind of these bypasses, religious bypass, emotional bypassing, all different types of things. And this work really for me is about how do you begin to temper your body so you can hold the energy and not do things to stop it. So when the quaking begins to happen, many times what we want to do is stop it, right? And what I'm saying is that in that quaking, if you don't allow it to happen, like if it becomes too much and overwhelming, then you can back out. But then you have to come back to it, right? At some point. And then when the quaking happens, if it becomes too much overwhelming, then you back out. And then you have to come back to it. And that's the tempering and conditioning process. So the reason why I'm saying that is that we've created all of these, listen, white folks can yoga and Buddhist the shit out of anything. I mean, y'all can yoga the shit out of something that should not be yoga, right? I mean, damn, right? It's like let the quaking happen for a little bit before you do that, right? And the reason is that your Buddhism and Christianing and yogaing the shit out of something thwarts your own emergence. Doesn't allow you to get to the suffering's edge so some other shit can come up culturally, can be cultivated. You're not allowing it to happen around race. Stop moving to these things to stop the quaking. You ain't gonna die. I know it feels like it because you ain't used to it. That's why your black girlfriend and your black boyfriend and the person you went to high school with and look at you crazy when you start saying this shit about race. That's why we look at you with a crazy ass side eye. Because we know you have not done the tempering and conditioning. Collectively, I'm not talking, this is not about individual niceness. Your individual niceness is fine. I'm glad. I want you to be nice to me. I don't want you to spit in my food when I order some shit. I don't want you to call me the N-word. I don't want you to act crazy and call the police when I'm barbecuing. I don't want you to do none of that shit. I want you to be nice to me. But that is inadequate to deal with the brutality that Black and brown people have dealt with and continue to deal with every fucking day. It is inadequate. Your individual niceness is inadequate. Develop a culture. So what came up as y'all were writing, some of y'all? Black and brown and indigenous people, this is not an opportunity for you to fillet your fucking soul in front of white folks. Do not do it. If you don't feel like you're in a place to say something, then keep your damn mics off. Do not fillet yourselves in front of people. That's another thing. That's another structural piece that happens, that's interwoven into this stuff, is that we because we have been, there's been so much access to our bodies. When something happens, we feel like we need to give access again. You don't.
Brother, how do you want to do this? Do you want to open it up?
I'm going to go to one other part. So in this next part, he is talking about the idea of anybody who's not white is defective, and that, you know, something's wrong with that person. So this is a very important piece in this video.
Right? This is just giving yourself support in that place that may be calling for it. And just that's all you're doing. Just dropping in just for a second, half a second. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So I want you to look at the camera and I want you to look at me. And I want you to hear me say this. You are not defective. You are not defective. You are not. You never have been. You never were. Shit has happened to you and your people. You are not defective. Black and brown bodies don't even realize we need to hear that. You are not. You are not. You are descended from the first African woman on earth. The first representation of humanness looked like you. You are not defective, sis. All of that stuff that you said is important, and you got to slow it down. It's got so much speed to it, sis. It's got so much, and everybody on this call could see the weight of it. They could hear it. They were experiencing it. That's why you got to slow it down. You got to slow it down. You got to slow it down, because this stuff, the ways that our parents and the ways that our parents' navigated this stuff is so trauma, racialized trauma. Time decontextualizes racialized trauma. Just time, it decontextualizes. So racialized trauma decontextualized in a person can look like personality. Racialized trauma decontextualized in a family can look like family traits. Racialized trauma in a people can look like culture. Not defective. Not defective. Sisters Naima, you are not defective. Never have been. Shit has happened to you and your people. Drop down, slow this shit down, so all of that energy that's fueling it can be metabolized over time. What happened to you did not happen to you individually. It happened to you communally. So you have to develop communal ways of working this shit through. Your own individual is not going to be enough, because what happens is you will back into the historical, you will back into the intergenerational, you will back into the persistent institutional, and then your own personal traumas will all get coupled together. Not defective, not an imposter, not fraudulent, in a structure that's built on the white body being the standard of humanness. Fraudulence and imposterness is woven into the structure. It is not individual. not defective, sis. You are not defective. You are not. The system, because you are not the standard structurally. I'm not talking about innately. Innately, you are beautiful. You are worthy. You are competent. Structurally, we have been rendered as monkey, primate, not human. The question in this country, the race question in this country, is a species question. It is a species question. It's not a cultural question. It's a species question. Are darker people less human? And when I say dark, I'm talking about Kareem and I'm talking about you. There is the variance from that suggests deviance from the standard of humans. The term race was used to denote species, race of dog, race of cat, race of bird. That's what it's always meant. And the answer in this country and across the world when it comes to white body supremacy is that we are not human. We are primate. But you intrinsically, you innately are beautiful. You're competent. We got to slow, but the energy of race fucks us up. It's got so much charge and weight to it that we don't even realize it until you start talking and we start talking. And all of a sudden this weight shows up in the room and on the call. That's why I say, no matter what particular thing you want to address, right? If you are not going to deal with the weight of that, it's going to be hard. If you're not moored, it's going to be hard. So just slow it down, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down. Go back and read the book again, get some other people to get online with you and read it. Just slow it down. You're not defective. There's nothing wrong with you. You're welcome.
So to my Desi brothers and sisters and Muslim brothers and sisters, to my brown and black and Asian people and Native and Aboriginal people, I want to say again what Resmaa said: you are not defective. To my children and to my elders and future generations, I want to say, you are not defective. You are not defective. So Resmaa Menakem is a powerful speaker, and he also has a lot of really good videos on YouTube, and his book is excellent, My Grandmother's Hands. So now the next step of going from PTSD to PTG, to post-traumatic growth. So 4 factors leading to post-traumatic growth are: be brutally honest optimism. Number 2, perception of control over events, and a coping style and a strong sense of self. So it's like going from, so not getting stuck in the victim mode. So going from there into action, into healing, going from passive to active. And then there are 5 domains of post-traumatic growth: personal strength, closer relationships, greater appreciation for life, new possibilities, and spiritual development. How can we measure if we have gone from PTSD to PTG? There's a thing called post-traumatic growth inventory, and in which we can look for positive responses in 5 areas. Does a person have appreciation for life? How are our relationships with others? There are new possibilities in life. We have personal strength, and we have experienced or are continuing to experience spiritual change. About 15 years ago, I met an African-American man who told me the biggest gift you can give to the world is to heal yourself. And I realized that one of our biggest accomplishments in life, or one of the most important lessons that we can learn in life is to, when we have made this accomplishment, it's one of the biggest accomplishment a person can make is when you don't repeat the unhealthy behaviors of your parents, so that the cycle stops there. John Bradshaw calls it the poisonous pedagogy, that the patterns, the harm gets passed down from generation to generation, and it can stop with you. This is a video about a personal story of a person, and it has a happy ending. So I thought we should end with a happy ending, end on a positive note.
My name is James. I'm 38 years old and I live with my wife and my son. I would like to tell you a story, my story. When I was a child, family life was sometimes bustling with fun and laughter. But growing up in my house was often scary too. My dad drank too much alcohol, and my mum, she suffered with depression. I often saw her in bed weeping. Growing up, I saw lots of things that frightened me, really frightened me. I watched my dad beat my mum as she begged him to stop. I stood there, still and silent, so helpless. I was badly beaten and humiliated at school. Nobody liked me. I felt that anger deep inside me too. I didn't know it at the time, but my brain and my body were altered by what was happening around me. The area of my brain responsible for keeping me safe, called the brainstem, was firing on all cylinders most of the time. You can imagine the brainstem like a fire alarm inside of my body. When I sensed danger, the alarm went off, and it made me want to protect myself before I'd even thought about what I was doing. The brain stores really frightening memories in a special way to make sure that it doesn't forget what is dangerous. It's a self-protective thing. Each time I saw something frightening happen, my brain froze. It froze the memory in time. It's like my brain said, this is so dangerous. I must remember this all the time to stay alive in case it happens again. This meant that my fire alarm was going off all the time growing up. Sometimes there was danger and sometimes there wasn't danger. My brain lost the ability to work out safety from threat. My memories were frozen in time, stuck on a loop, making me feel I'm going to be hurt over and over again. I felt scared all the time. I realise now that when I felt scared, my brainstem threw me into survival mode as a way of protecting me from harm. Sometimes I would go into flight or fight mode, and sometimes I would go into freeze or collapse. When I was in flight or fight mode, survival mode, I used to hit out, shout, put others down, run away. My teachers and family described me as naughty kid, and I believed them. I believed I was bad inside. Inside though, I was feeling terrified and very, very lonely. My aggression was only there to keep others away from my loneliness. I felt so ashamed of it. When I was in freeze, collapse, survival mode, I hid away in my room and pushed everyone away. Some days I felt so dark that I couldn't even get out of bed. On those dark days, I felt numb all over, like an empty shell. It was like my body did not belong to me. Disconnecting from the world was sometimes the only thing my brain and body knew how to do. I grew up as a kid, feeling on the edge of danger the whole time, feeling ready to fight or run away or disappear completely. Tiny things used to push me over the edge and make me fight or shut down. Sometimes just being told no was enough to make me flip out. In my teenage years, I really lost my way. Drugs were the only thing I had to keep the pain away. I got in trouble with the police, dropped out of college, and just couldn't settle anywhere or with anyone. I was alone. Something happened. When I was 21, I met this girl, Elaine. Couldn't believe that she loved me. I was pretty mean to her. Elaine fell pregnant, and even though my heart told me not to, we moved in together. I needed to build my own home, my own family. The foundations I had to offer were broken and wobbly. You see, my brainstem was still firing on all cylinders.
So from there, he goes to the healing part, fast forward to the healing part, and that's where the happy ending to the story is.
I noticed that I could think and feel at the same time. Has helped my brainstem to calm. My internal fire alarm isn't triggered all of the time, and I can feel grounded, connected to the earth beneath my feet. The most important thing for me was that I could protect Sam from going through the same pain as me. After my EMDR was well underway, we had some help as a whole family. Our family therapist helped me to notice Sam in a different way. He helped me to understand what his cries mean, and I was able to give him the love that he was craving. I was helped to put myself in Sam's shoes and always have his mind in my mind. When his emotions were too big for him, instead of blowing my top, I hugged him tight. I hugged him tight and told him that his feelings will come and they will go. And I let him know how hard it must be to feel so bad. Elaine and I had to work really hard too. The foundation of our relationship was what everything was built on. Sam is now 5 years old. Family life has its ups and downs, but you know what? We have rebuilt those broken foundations to a good enough place. Good enough to walk on, good enough to dance on, good enough even to build on. Without the therapies I had, which took 3 long years, we'd still be walking on those broken pieces. Something happened inside me a little while ago. I needed to spread the word about trauma because it had been a dark, misunderstood thing in my life until the day that I went to that GP. I told my mates. They told their mates. Their mates told their families. The story is spreading. The foundations, floors and fenestrations of my own building, my own emotional architecture are being repaired, as well as all of those around me, community by community, village by village, and who knows, maybe one day, city by city.
So healing is possible, and there is a lot of help available out there. Rumi is considered a best-selling poet in the US for the last 15 years. And one of his quotes is, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." So you can turn this wound and these injuries into a spiritual exercise or a transformative event that happened. The wound is a place where the light enters you. And Jesse Jackson said, one of his famous sayings is, "Keep hope alive." And this one, a quote from Jesse Jackson is, "You are not responsible for being down, but you are responsible for getting up." So life is difficult. Struggle is part of it. And we can fall down, but we just gotta get back up, dust ourselves off, and keep going. Hopefully with a little help from our friends. Robert Bly wrote a book called Iron John. And he says in there, "Where a man's wound is, that is where his genius will be. Transcending that wound is from where we will give our major gift to serve humanity, to serve the community." So the lessons, the most important lessons that we can learn come from that trauma, from those deep wounds. And once we learn those lessons, then it becomes a gift. And that gift we can give to others. And that's the end of the presentation. I end with a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh: "Be free where you are. Be free where you are."